My wife's lover offered me $200,000 to forget she was mine, while she laughed and called our marriage a mistake. But they didn't know I was the lead engineer auditing the very secret account they were using to steal money from me on their needs. The rain drummed against the windshield of Ben's car, a relentless, rhythmic sound that matched the pounding in his chest. In his pocket sat a small, velvet box containing a custom-cut sapphire ring, a piece he had designed himself, reflecting the blue of the ocean where he and Millie had spent their honeymoon 4 years ago. He was a man of logic, a senior DevOps engineer who spent his days building indestructible digital fortresses for high-stakes financial firms. He believed in systems, in structure, and above all, in the 4-year foundation of his marriage. But for the past 2 months, that foundation had been crumbling. Millie, once warm and supportive, had become a ghost in their own home. She had replaced their late-night conversations with cold silences and a phone that never left her hand, always face down, always locked. Ben had tried to talk to her, to offer support, thinking perhaps the stress of her job in corporate PR was finally taking its toll. Each time, he was met with a sharp, irritable retort that made him feel like a stranger in his own living room. Tonight was supposed to be the reset. He had followed the location tag she had accidentally left active on their shared tablet, leading him not to a quiet work dinner, as she had claimed, but to a sprawling, glass-walled mansion on the outskirts of the city. The house was pulsing with bass and light, a playground for the young and the recklessly wealthy. Ben stepped out of the car, the cool air doing nothing to settle his nerves. He moved through the crowd, his professional attire looking stark and out of place among the silk shirts and designer dresses. He saw her near the infinity pool. Millie was glowing, a glass of vintage champagne in one hand, her head tilted back in a laugh he hadn't heard in months. She wasn't alone. Her hand was resting familiarly on the shoulder of a man Ben recognized from the news, Julian Vance, a hedge fund manager known more for his aggressive takeovers than his ethics. Ben's heart didn't break in that moment. It went cold, entering the clinical, analytical state he used when a server was under a massive DDoS attack. He walked toward them. The air around the couple seemed to freeze as he approached. "Millie," Ben said, his voice low but steady. She didn't jump. She didn't look guilty. Instead, she looked annoyed. She turned to Ben, her eyes raking over his tired face with a look of pure disdain. "Ben, what are you doing here? I told you I was working late." "I can see that," Ben replied, his gaze shifting to Julian. Julian didn't look threatened. He looked amused, like a predator watching a harmless insect. He reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and pulled out a leather checkbook. With a practiced, arrogant flourish, he scribbled a number and tore the slip of paper off. He held it out toward Ben's chest. "Let's skip the drama, Ben," Julian said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I've seen your tax returns from the joint filings Millie showed me. You're a smart guy, but you're a 5-figure guy. This check is for $200,000. Take it, walk away, and forget she was ever your wife. It's more than you'd make in 3 years of sitting behind a keyboard." Ben looked at the check, then at Millie. He waited for the flash of horror, for her to tell Julian he was insane. Instead, she tucked a stray hair behind her ear and smiled. It was a sharp, predatory smile he had never seen before. "He's right, Ben," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "I was planning to file for divorce on Monday anyway. We've outgrown each other. You're obsessed with security and stability, while I want a life that actually moves. Take the money. Consider it a bonus for the 4 years of service." The words hit harder than any physical blow could. The woman he had spent 4 years protecting, the woman he was about to ask to start a family with, was treating their life together like a discontinued software subscription. Ben didn't take the check. He didn't yell. He simply looked at the digital watch on his wrist. It was 11:42 p.m. "Is that your final offer, Julian?" Ben asked, his voice eerily calm. "It's the only offer," Julian sneered, dropping the check onto the wet tiles at Ben's feet. "Now get out before I have security show you the gate." Ben turned and walked away, the velvet box in his pocket feeling like a heavy stone. As he reached his car, he opened his laptop. He didn't call a lawyer yet. He didn't call his family. He logged into the secure VPN of his firm, Sentinel Cloud Systems. As the lead auditor for their highest-tier financial clients, Ben had spent the last week investigating a series of ghost transactions in a high-priority account, an account Julian Vance used to manage his private, offshore interests. Earlier that day, Ben had flagged a secret sub-account that was being used to funnel stolen corporate funds into a private lifestyle fund. Ben looked at the most recent activity on that secret account. There were charges for the champagne Millie was drinking, the dress she was wearing, and even the rental for the mansion they were currently standing in. They weren't just cheating on him. They were using a fund that Ben had been legally tasked to audit to pay for their betrayal. A sharp, cold smile touched Ben's lips. Julian Vance thought he was buying a man's silence for $200,000. He had no idea he was mocking the one man who held the digital keys to his prison cell. Ben sat in his car, the blue light of the laptop screen illuminating the grim set of his jaw. He wasn't looking for a way to save his marriage anymore. He was performing an autopsy on it. As the lead engineer for Sentinel Cloud, Ben had spent years perfecting the art of digital forensics. He knew that people lied, but data never did. He accessed the sub-account logs again, his fingers flying across the keys with a precision that comes from a decade of high-pressure coding. The account, labeled Project Serenity, was hidden behind 3 layers of shell companies, but Julian Vance had made a fatal mistake. He had authorized a trusted device to access the encrypted portal. When Ben pulled the device ID, his breath hitched. It was a flagship smartphone, the exact model he had bought Millie for her birthday 6 months ago. The realization was a jagged blade in his gut. Millie hadn't just been having an affair. She had been Julian's digital proxy. Julian, as a hedge fund manager, was legally barred from certain types of high-frequency trading and offshore transfers due to a previous SEC settlement. He had been using Millie's identity, her clean background, and her IP address to bypass federal filters. She was the one hitting the enter key on transactions that were essentially high-level embezzlement. Ben looked at the timestamp of a $50,000 transfer. It had occurred on Tuesday at 2 p.m., the exact time Millie had texted him saying she was stuck in a boring meeting and missing him. The money had moved from Julian's corporate client security fund into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. "She didn't just walk away from me," Ben whispered to the empty car. "She turned our home into a money laundering hub." Suddenly, a notification flashed on his screen. A new login attempt. Someone was accessing the Project Serenity portal right now, from the mansion. They were moving more money. Ben watched the cursor blink. Another $150,000 was being prepared for transfer. He could see the destination, a private jet charter company. They weren't just partying. They were preparing to leave. Ben didn't hit the kill switch yet. He knew that in a courtroom, a simple shutdown could be explained away as a technical glitch. He needed the trail to be undeniable. He initiated a shadow mirror protocol, a high-level auditing tool that silently copied every keystroke and every authorization token Julian and Millie were using. As the data flowed onto his drive, Ben's phone buzzed. It was a text from his sister, Clara, a partner at one of the city's top white-collar defense firms. "Ben, I just saw the news alert. Julian Vance's firm is under a snap audit by the board. Are you the one running it?" Ben didn't reply immediately. He realized the stakes were higher than a broken heart. If Julian and Millie successfully moved that money tonight, the shadow trail would vanish into the blockchain, and Ben's firm would be held liable for the security failure. Julian would blame the audit leak on Ben, claiming Ben was a disgruntled husband trying to sabotage a client. Ben put the car in gear and drove, but not toward his home. He drove to a nondescript office building downtown, the secondary data hub for Sentinel Cloud. He needed a hardwired connection to the mainframe to do what he had to do next. While he drove, his mind drifted back to the mansion. The way Julian had dropped that check on the ground. The way Millie hadn't even looked down at it. They thought Ben was a 5-figure guy who could be bought or intimidated. They viewed his professionalism as a weakness, a sign of a small mind that followed rules they were too big to obey. He reached the data hub and bypassed the security desk with his master badge. The server room was cold, the air smelling of ozone and chilled copper. Ben sat at the main terminal. He didn't just have the logs now. He had the executive override. He opened a private channel to the firm's board of directors and the Federal Bureau of Investigation's cyber division. But he didn't send the files yet. He waited. He watched the Project Serenity account. A message appeared on the internal chat tool Julian and Millie were using. Julian, is the transfer ready? The pilot is waiting. I told that idiot husband of yours he could keep the $200K as a consolation prize. He's probably crying into his keyboard right now. Millie, almost ready. I'm just finalizing the last block. He really is pathetic, isn't he? He thought we were building a future. I just wanted a way out of that boring life. Ben felt a surge of cold, concentrated malice. He didn't want their money, and he didn't want an apology. He wanted them to feel the exact moment the ground vanished beneath their feet. Ben typed a command into the terminal that didn't just freeze the account. It reversed the flow. Instead of the $150,000 going to the jet company, Ben redirected it back into the client security fund it was stolen from, but he did it using Millie's personal digital signature. Then, he triggered a compliance alert to every major bank in Julian's network. The twist came a second later. As Ben scanned the final files, he found a document labeled Preemptive Strike. It was a draft for a lawsuit Millie was planning to file against Ben on Monday morning. She wasn't just leaving him. She was accusing him of domestic financial abuse to explain why his money, which was actually the stolen funds, was in her name. She had planned to send him to prison to cover her own tracks. Just then, his terminal pinged. A high-priority system intrusion alert. Someone was trying to wipe the server from the outside. Julian had realized the audit was live. Ben looked at the screen, his finger hovering over the send button to the FBI. But he noticed something strange. The wipe command wasn't coming from Julian. It was coming from a third party, a high-level executive at Ben's own firm. Ben realized he wasn't just fighting his wife and her lover. He had uncovered a conspiracy that went all the way to the top of Sentinel Cloud. If he sent the data now, he wouldn't just be a witness. He would be the man who took down a billion-dollar company. And the person trying to stop him was his own mentor. The chill of the server room felt more oppressive than ever. Ben stared at the source code of the wipe command. The digital signature belonged to Robert Hayes, the CEO of Sentinel Cloud and the man who had hired Ben 6 years ago. Robert wasn't just his boss. He was the man who had stood as a witness at Ben and Millie's wedding. The logic of the betrayal finally clicked into place. Julian Vance wasn't just some rogue hedge fund manager who happened to seduce Ben's wife. He was a major investor in Sentinel Cloud. Robert was protecting the company's stock price by allowing Julian to use their secure architecture as a laundry for stolen capital. Millie hadn't been chosen for her beauty or her PR skills. She had been recruited by Robert to act as the ultimate blind spot in Ben's department. Ben leaned back, his breath hitching. They had counted on his love for Millie to keep him from looking too closely at her devices. And they had counted on his loyalty to Robert to keep him from questioning the firm's special projects. They had treated his integrity like a cage. Suddenly, the intercom in the private data hub crackled. Ben? I know you're in there. Stop what you're doing. It was Robert's voice. He wasn't at the mansion. He was in the building, likely in the executive suite 3 floors up. I can see your terminal activity, Ben. Robert continued, his tone shifting from fatherly to cold and transactional. You've done a great job finding the leak, but you need to understand the bigger picture. If Julian falls, this firm falls. Thousands of employees lose their pensions. The market crashes. Do you really want that on your conscience because your wife had a lapse in judgment? Ben didn't answer. He watched as the wipe progress bar reached 40%. Robert was manually overriding Ben's local blocks. Take the $200,000 from Julian, Robert's voice echoed. I'll double it from the firm's discretionary fund. We'll call it a severance package. You move to the coast, you start over, and we tell the board this was all a Chinese state-sponsored hack. Everybody wins. Everyone except the clients Julian stole from. Ben finally spoke, his voice vibrating with a quiet, lethal intensity. And everyone except the man who thought he had a friend in you, Robert. Don't be a martyr, Ben. Martyrs are just people who didn't know how to negotiate. Ben's fingers returned to the keyboard. He wasn't trying to stop the wipe anymore. He knew Robert had higher administrative privileges. Instead, Ben began a data fragmentation sequence. If he couldn't stop the deletion, he would scatter the encrypted pieces of the evidence into the firm's public-facing marketing servers. It wouldn't be visible to the public, but it would be impossible for Robert to delete without shutting down the entire global website, an act that would automatically trigger a massive SEC investigation. On his secondary screen, Ben kept the shadow mirror on the mansion. Julian and Millie were getting frantic. Julian was on the phone, screaming at someone about a frozen gateway. Millie was throwing her belongings into a designer suitcase, her face pale. Julian, the accounts aren't just frozen, Millie yelled, her voice captured by the hidden laptop mic. The signatures are being rerouted. It looks like I'm the one authorized the reversal. If the police come, I'm the one who signed for the theft. Shut up and keep typing, Julian roared. Robert said he'd handle the engineer. Just get the backup drive. Ben watched as Millie ran toward the wall safe in the mansion study. She pulled out a physical hardware wallet, the cold storage for the remaining millions. Back in the server room, Robert was losing his patience. Ben, I'm locking the cooling doors. The temperature in that room is going to drop to sub-zero in 60 seconds. Walk away from the terminal or you won't be walking anywhere. Ben felt the first blast of freezing air hit his neck. The room's industrial HVAC system was designed to protect the machines, but at full power, it could kill a human in minutes. He didn't move. He had 40 seconds left until the fragmentation was complete. 30 seconds. The air was becoming a mist. Ben's fingers were growing numb, making it harder to hit the keys. 20 seconds. He saw Millie on the screen, clutching the hardware wallet, heading for the front door of the mansion. Julian was right behind her. 10 seconds. The fragmentation reached 95%. Last chance, Ben. Robert screamed over the intercom. Ben hit the final enter key. The data vanished from the secure vault, but it didn't disappear. It shattered into 1,000,000 pieces, hidden in the source code of the company's homepage. Then he sent a system pulse, a signal that woke up every printer in the executive suite and the mansion. Suddenly, the printer in the mansion's hallway began to spit out pages. Hundreds of them. They weren't just documents. They were the transcripts of the chat logs between Julian and Millie, and the emails between Julian and Robert Hayes. Millie stopped at the door, staring at the paper. She picked one up. It was a copy of the preemptive strike document, but Ben had edited it. At the bottom, he had added a single line in bold. The logic of a system is only as strong as the man who maintains it. Goodbye, Millie. The twist came as the mansion's front door was kicked open. It wasn't the police. It was the investors. The same dangerous men Julian had been skimming from. They didn't have badges. They had the look of people who didn't care about Project Serenity or legal audits. Ben watched through the camera as Julian's face went from rage to absolute, paralyzing terror. He realized that Robert hadn't sent the police to protect the money. Robert had tipped off the investors to clean up the mess, so that Julian and Millie wouldn't live to testify against the firm. Ben sat in the freezing server room, realizing that by exposing the truth, he hadn't just secured justice, illegally or otherwise. He had signed his wife's death warrant. The server room was now a tomb of white mist, the temperature plummeting so low that Ben's breath came in ragged, crystallized gasps. His fingers were nearly blue, but his mind remained a sharp, analytical instrument. On the monitor, the scene at the mansion was descending into a nightmare. The investors weren't there to talk. They were the silent enforcers of a private equity group that Julian had defrauded, and they moved with a terrifying, synchronized efficiency. Julian tried to back away, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of negotiation. I can get the money. It's just a technical delay. Robert is handling it. One of the men, a tall figure in a tailored charcoal suit, didn't even blink. He looked at the mountain of paper spitting out of the printer, the logs of Julian's betrayal. Robert isn't handling anything, Julian. Robert is the one who told us where the hardware wallet was. He said you were planning to skip the country with his share. Millie stood paralyzed, the titanium briefcase containing the cold storage millions trembling in her grip. She looked at the men, then at Julian, and finally at the camera lens she didn't know was watching her. The exciting life she had traded Ben for had turned into a death trap in less than an hour. In the server room, the heavy steel doors groaned. Robert Hayes had realized that Ben wouldn't be intimidated by the cold. The CEO was now physically at the door, trying to bypass the manual deadbolt Ben had slid into place before starting the audit. "Open the door, Ben." Robert's muffled voice roared through the steel. "You've already ruined them. If you stop now, I can still save your career. I can tell the board you were under duress." Ben ignored him. He was focused on a secondary data stream. While Robert was busy trying to break into the room, Ben had opened a backdoor into Robert's private cloud. He found what he was looking for: a folder labeled Sentinel Insurance Contingency. It wasn't insurance for the company. It was life insurance for Robert. It contained recorded video calls of Julian Vance bragging about the money he was funneling to political figures and regulatory heads to keep Sentinel Cloud stock inflated. Robert had been blackmailing his own investors to keep his seat as CEO. Ben felt a surge of cold fury. This wasn't just about a cheating wife or a crooked boss. This was a parasitic ecosystem that survived by draining the life savings of ordinary people. "You didn't just help them, Robert," Ben whispered, his voice cracking from the cold. "You owned them." On the mansion screen, the situation turned. The men in suits reached for the briefcase. Millie, fueled by a sudden, desperate survival instinct, didn't hand it over. She turned and sprinted toward the back of the house, toward the darkened gardens. Julian, ever the coward, didn't follow her to protect her. He ran in the opposite direction, hoping she would serve as the distraction. The men didn't hesitate. One followed Julian. Two went after Millie. Ben watched the GPS tag on Millie's phone, which he was still tracking. She was heading for the ravine at the edge of the property. In the dark, with the rain slicking the grass, it was a suicide run. Ben's hand hovered over the emergency broadcast button. If he pushed it, every police precinct in a 50-mile radius would receive the coordinates of the mansion and the evidence of the crime. But it would also alert the investors that the authorities were closing in, likely causing them to execute Julian and Millie immediately to leave no witnesses. "Ben, I'm cutting the power," Robert screamed from the hallway. "In 5 seconds, this whole rack goes dark. You'll lose everything." "Then we both lose," Ben replied. Ben didn't push the police button. Instead, he did something Robert never expected. He used his DevOps access to trigger the building fire suppression system, not in the server room, but in the executive suite where Robert was standing. Suddenly, the sound of massive industrial pumps roared through the building. In the hallway, Robert was slammed by a high-pressure torrent of fire-retardant foam and water, designed to smother a chemical fire. The CEO was swept off his feet, his master keycard flying across the floor. Ben used those few seconds of chaos to finalize the upload. He didn't send the data to the police. He sent it to the short sellers, the aggressive market analysts who made money by betting against failing companies. Within minutes, the news of Sentinel Cloud's fraud would be all over the global trading floors. The stock would plummet to zero. Robert Hayes' fortune would vanish before he could even dry his clothes. On the mansion feed, Millie had reached the edge of the ravine. She was cornered. The men in suits were closing in. One of them leveled a suppressed handgun at her. "The briefcase, Millie," the man said, his voice calm and terrifying. "Julian is already in the van. Don't make this a double funeral." Millie looked down at the briefcase, then back at the house. She looked broken. "Ben," she sobbed, a name she hadn't spoken with anything but venom for months. "Ben, please." Ben watched her through the screen. Part of him wanted to look away. Part of him wanted to let the logical consequences of her choices finish their work. But as he looked at her, he remembered the blue sapphire ring still in his pocket. He wasn't doing this for her. He was doing it because he was the man he had always been. Ben triggered the mansion security override. Suddenly, every high-decibel alarm in Julian's house went off. The exterior floodlights began to strobe at a frequency designed to disorient. The heavy industrial sprinklers on the lawn turned on, creating a wall of water. In the confusion, the man with the gun flinched. Millie didn't wait. She didn't drop the briefcase. She threw it, not to the man, but deep into the overgrown ravine. "If I can't have it, nobody does," she screamed. The men scrambled toward the edge, momentarily distracted by the loss of the millions. Millie turned to run, but she slipped on the muddy embankment. The twist was silent. As Ben watched, Millie didn't fall into the ravine. She was grabbed by the arm and pulled back. But it wasn't a savior. It was Julian. He had circled back, not to save her, but to use her as a human shield while he tried to reach the car. But Julian had forgotten one thing. Ben had spent the last hour reverse engineering the mansion's smart car system. As Julian dragged Millie toward his luxury SUV, the vehicle's engine didn't start. Instead, the doors locked, the windows rolled up, and the car's horn began a steady, rhythmic blast that signaled its exact location to the entire neighborhood. Ben sat back, the cold finally reaching his heart. The police sirens were audible now, coming from the distance. He had saved their lives, but he had destroyed their world. The server room door finally buckled. Robert Hayes stumbled in, drenched and shivering, his face twisted in a mask of pure hate. He looked at the monitors, then at Ben. "You've killed the company, Ben. You've killed everything." "No," Ben said, standing up on shaky, frozen legs. "I just performed a system restore. The corruption has been deleted." The final twist came as Ben's laptop chirped. It was a private message, redirected through 7 proxies. It was from his father. "Ben, check the hardware wallet's ID again. The one Millie had." Ben looked. His eyes widened. The briefcase Millie had thrown into the ravine wasn't the one containing the millions. The ID didn't match the Project Serenity vault. It was a dummy. A decoy Ben's father had helped him prepare weeks ago, when Ben first started suspecting the audit was a trap. Ben realized then that the real money, the 30 million Julian had stolen, wasn't in the ravine. It wasn't in the car. It was currently sitting in a restricted legal trust, waiting for the clients to claim it. And Millie? She hadn't known. She had risked her life for a suitcase full of shredded newspaper. The silence in the server room was absolute, broken only by the fading whine of the cooling fans. Robert Hayes stood by the mangled door, his expensive suit ruined, looking like a ghost of the powerful man he had been an hour ago. He stared at the screens, watching the flashing blue and red lights of the police cruisers as they swarmed Julian Vance's mansion. "You think you're a hero?" Robert whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of exhaustion and spite. "But look at what you've done. You've bankrupted 1,000 honest employees to catch one dishonest wife. Was it worth it, Ben? Was the moral high ground worth the wreckage?" Ben didn't look at him. He was watching the feed as the federal agents led Julian Vance toward a transport van. Julian looked small, his arrogance stripped away, his face a mask of bewildered terror. Behind him, Millie was being escorted by a female officer. She was wrapped in a shock blanket, her hair matted with mud, her designer dress torn. She looked toward the sky, perhaps hoping for a miracle that was never going to come. "It wasn't about the moral high ground, Robert," Ben said, his voice raspy from the freezing air. "It was about the data. A system with a core corruption eventually fails. I just accelerated the timeline. The employees will be protected by the federal receivership. The only things that died tonight were the lies." Ben stood up, his joints aching from the cold. He packed his laptop with slow, deliberate movements. He felt a strange, hollow lightness in his chest. For years, his life had been a series of variables he tried to control, a code he tried to optimize. He had built a fortress around Millie, only to realize she was the one digging a tunnel under the walls. As Ben walked out of the building, the morning sun was just beginning to bleed over the horizon, casting long, sharp shadows across the pavement. He didn't go to the police station. He didn't go to the mansion. He drove to the one place that felt honest, the small, weathered pier where he used to go fishing with his father. He sat on the edge of the wood, the salt air stinging his face. He pulled the velvet box from his pocket. He opened it, looking at the sapphire. It was beautiful, clear, and perfectly structured. It represented everything he thought he had. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the ring into the dark water. There was a small splash, and then the surface was still again. 2 days later, the fallout hit the front pages. Sentinel Cloud Systems had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Robert Hayes was under indictment for corporate conspiracy. Julian Vance was being held without bail, facing charges of money laundering and wire fraud. And then there was Millie, Ben's lawyer, a man who dealt in cold facts and hard numbers, sat across from him in a quiet diner. He pushed a folder across the table. "She wants to see you, Ben," the lawyer said. "She's claiming she was coerced. She's telling the prosecutors that Julian forced her to use her accounts, that she was a victim of his manipulation. Her lawyers think that if you testify to her good character, she might get a suspended sentence." Ben opened the folder. Inside was a letter from Millie, written on yellow legal pad paper from the county jail. The handwriting was shaky, filled with the same emotional appeals she had used for 4 years. "Ben, please. I was scared. I didn't know what I was doing. I was lost and he took advantage of me. You know me, Ben. You know I'm not a criminal. Please don't let them take my life away." Ben read the words, but he didn't feel the old tug of protective instinct. He remembered the look on her face when she laughed at the $200,000 offer. He remembered the digital signature on the preemptive strike document where she planned to accuse him of abuse. "What do you want to do?" the lawyer asked. Ben looked out the window at the busy street. He saw people going to work, couples holding hands, lives being lived in the messy, unscripted reality of the world. "I've already submitted my final report to the SEC," Ben said. "The report contains the chat logs from the night of the party. It contains the timestamp of when she opened the safe to take the hardware wallet. The data is the testimony. I have nothing else to say to her." The lawyer nodded, a look of grim respect in his eyes. "She'll likely get 10 years, Ben. Without your help, the coercion defense is dead." "The defense isn't dead," Ben replied quietly. "It just isn't supported by the logs." The story of Ben and Millie didn't end with a grand confrontation or a cinematic reunion. It ended in a courtroom 3 months later, where Ben sat in the back row, invisible to the woman he had once loved. He watched as the judge read the sentence. Millie didn't scream. She just slumped, a small, broken figure in a sea of legal paperwork. As Ben walked out of the courthouse, a journalist stopped him, asking if he felt vindicated by the destruction of the people who betrayed him. Ben stopped and looked at the man. "Vindication implies there's a winner," he said. "In a system failure this total, there are no winners. There is only the truth that remains when the noise stops. I'm just a man who cleaned the records." Ben walked away, disappearing into the crowd. He was no longer the man with the sapphire ring, and he was no longer the lead engineer of a corrupt empire. He was just a person with a clean slate, a laptop, and the hard-won knowledge that while you can't always control the people in your life, you can always control how much of your soul you give to their lies. The moral was simple, yet heavy. Integrity isn't about the absence of betrayal. It's about the refusal to be reshaped by it. Ben had lost his world, but he had saved himself. And in the end, that was the only audit that mattered.